So good afternoon. Welcome. My name is Troy Gerber. I'm a solution strategist with Fusion 5 based out in Auckland, presenting from Melbourne today because I scheduled business trips the same day as the summit and forgot about it. But no worries. Good to have everybody on board. Today's session is practical steps to governing the Power Platform. And I want to preface the session with there ain't going to be a lot of demos. This is really just some learnings from the field and some practical guidance on putting in place governments for the Power Platform. So quite a lot of talking and a lot of IP hopefully you can take. And the idea is that whatever we go through today, you should be able to take back to your organization, actually start implementing either immediately or within a very short period of time. So this is a level 100 session, no tech, all talk. So let's have a quick look at why we want to even bother governing the Power Platform. What does it matter? What is the purpose of doing any form of governance? And it's actually quite simple. A couple of reasons, and we'll do 3 per slide just to make it sort of nice and concise. Return on investment. We're actually are paying for Power Platform licensing either through our seeded licenses, through our E or D license SKUs. And in some cases, we're actually buying licensing as well to be able to support premium connectors or things like AI Builder, Power Virtual Agent, etc. So we want to make sure we're actually using what we've paid for and using it effectively. There's 2 reasons why we want to do that. One is because it makes a lot of sense to actually use what you're paying for properly. And secondly, if we're using it properly, we're also going to see a return on investment. So we can go back to the business and say, look, this thing really works. We can see it not only is it adding more functionality and collaboration to our organization, but it's actually yielding a positive cost as well. To make sure we are getting what we pay for and we're getting the value that we're expected and communicate that back to our executive team. Another reason we want to do governance is we want to be able to match user expectation and drive adoption when we're looking at users adopting the Power Platform. And I'm sure a lot of you on this call would have the similar scenario when you click on that default environment and there's just a list of apps, and some of them are called Test One or Hello World or My First Model Driven App. This is not a great user experience for users. We want to make sure that when our users are starting to adopt the Power Platform, is that they can actually use it effectively. And that comes down to trust. We're bringing something into the environment or into the organization that is potentially new or might be different from what they're used to. And if we can't get trust from our users to know the platform has been well maintained, looked after, and is not just a place for clutter, we'll actually get better user adoption as well. Well, user adoption also comes from the fact that we're going to be managing the environment a lot better so that what they get out actually makes sense from a business perspective. And we'll touch on that in a few slides from now around how we can actually work with that. And then the third one is supportability. And the supportability is in the context of IT support. So Power Platform, as much as it is a platform, is another system that IT need to support. Not only from a technical perspective to make sure the right things have been done in the back end, but also operationally from a first line support. And it will stem into a bigger IT support when it comes to app dev and lifecycle management. So we want to understand what our users are doing with the Power Platform so we can make clever decisions and make sure we are aware of how we are actually managing those solutions. One of the points I do talk about a bit later is, like, for instance, we would love to know how many connectors are being used and which connectors are potentially being deprecated, so that we can connect with the users and say, hey, they're deprecating the legacy database connector. Please make sure all your solutions are updated to the new connector and you've made those updates. And this could be an internal communication, or it might be something where you're managing a customer's environment and you want to be able to communicate that back as well. So why does it matter? Return investment, make sure users are happy, and make sure we have a wonderful, supportable environment. So the first thing, and this is one of the first practical steps, and some people on the call might be thinking, well, why he should just jump straight in and talk about the COE, and we'll get there, but this is a preface before we get to implementing the COE. It's a team sport. We need to be on board and make sure everybody's on the same boat or the same waka as we have in New Zealand and is heading forward and doing the same thing. So having a Power Platform governance team actually makes sense. Now, normally when you say let's create a governance team, People will roll their eyes and go, oh, another team I need to be a part of. So we'll talk a little bit about how that team looks and what its functionality is and how it actually is not an impediment, but actually something you can move forward. So why do we want to have a team? You're going to need to make decisions and follow them up. So decisions need to be made around the Power Platform. And we'll talk about a few of those in a moment as well. You also need to align with your company's strategy when it comes to your transformation strategy and also your overall strategic direction your organization is going in. So that might seem a bit like a heady thing, like why am I concerned about my company's strategic decision? How does it impact? Well, any strategic decision your company makes is going to impact your IT solutions that you're going to be investing in and the way you actually work as well. So we need to have a team on board that can actually know about this information and move forward with it when it comes to managing the Power Platform and what it's going to do with inside of your business or your customer's business if you're an ISV and you're providing services to a third party. So what we need is, and this is the team members, first person needs to be a chairman who can make decisions. Now, this chair is a little bit of a role that exists. It's a physical role, so there has to be a person that is in charge there. They don't necessarily need to be this the person that comes up with the solutions or the ideas or does anything. It's not a figurehead role, it's an actual role. They don't necessarily even have to chair the actual meetings but they are there to enforce the decisions you make. So let's take a practical example. Somebody says, I want to go and roll out Power Virtual Agent for this. And you guys say, well, we can do that, but it has a license requirement and you can do the business case. This has to go to somebody for budget. And typically you want a senior manager who can go with a big stick and have that fight on your behalf. Or if there's a discrepancy around how something has been done in the Power Platform or how it's been used, it could be something as simple as a lifecycle management decision, or who's allowed to access the environments as an admin. And we'll talk about that in the slide or two. You sometimes need somebody in an authoritative position to do that. This is not a full-time role. Sometimes they can just get the minutes and they can be part of the decision making or the finalization. The next person you need is somebody from your information security. So you need an information security rep. And this is because part of what you're going to do down the line when we get down to the ends of the slides is implement security principles like data loss prevention. And you need somebody who actually understands the company's information security policies to contribute to that. So this person is a contributor. They'll be in the meetings you have in the beginning, any decisions you make around the Power Platform that has a security consequence. They'll be able to vet and make sure it fits into what you've already decided. So they are basically a full-time member of your team and will attend the meetings you're having. You then need IT operation support, so there needs to be somebody from an IT point of view that understands what's been done and knows what to do to support it, either from an end user perspective or from something as simple as doing the monitoring and looking at logs and looking at what's actually coming through when you do roll out the reporting around Power Platform as well. And last but not least, representatives from the different business areas that are going to be using Power Platform. So that might seem like a bit of a broad group, but we all know there are certain groups in our organization that tend to be fast adopters or early adopters. So bringing those people in, those power users, or people that have maybe had the first need to build a Power Platform solution or using it the most, bringing them in. And this is twofold. One is to understand their user experience, what they're actually experiencing, and get user feedback around support, around functionality. And a lot of the champions tend to do things like follow amazing people online like Shane Young or read articles and look at trends, is to get their feedback and incorporate that into some of the decision making. How often does this team meet? Once you've got it established, you're going to have a quick meeting and you're probably going to run meetings every 2 to 3 weeks for the first 2 or 3 months as you make decisions and ratify that into some sort of documented format, be it a document, be it a page on your SharePoint site. And once that's in place, you can use it as a placeholder maintenance team. Literally, some customers just create a Microsoft team where the governance team shares their thoughts, and anything that comes up is posted there, and they make a decision. It doesn't have to be a meeting. It could just be by mutual vote. So first thing, establish a governance team. This is an old school concept. This is not new. It's been around with every technology that's been pushed out there and is something that is really worthwhile. Otherwise, you'll sit in a scenario where nobody makes decisions, people don't adopt, and things go a little bit crazy when things go wrong. Cool. Next, the default is not always the best. What do we mean by that? So when we have Power Platform, let's take a typical scenario. We have an E3 license. I log in with my account for the first time. I've just joined the business. And if I click around enough and find the waffle, there'll be something called Power Platform and Power Apps. And when I click in, it's going to give me the option to build stuff in the default environment with my own account. That is a terrible practice. We can do it. It's there. Microsoft's recommendation, we'll talk about in a moment, is to create a different environment for it. And I think that's key. But we want to make sure we don't always go with the default. We want to make sure we go and change. And this is a habit changing thing. Some of the decisions that you will make when it comes to not having the default settings will be driven from your governance team. So there's a bit of a process flow. Your governance team, their decisions will actually impact what the defaults will be. So one of the first things we need to do, and there's my mandatory Lord of the Rings reference, because hey, it's New Zealand and we're super proud of that, including Pavlova. So one of the things we'll need to do is look at what accounts we are going to use. And this is one account to rule them all, sort of, because there's typically more. But effectively, we should look at having at a minimum, a Power Apps deployment or app owner account that we use to deploy Power Platform solutions into their production environment. And we'll touch on environments in the next slide. And this account is the only account that has the rights in production environment to actually do deployments, and it can be integrated into your lifecycle from a deployment automation perspective as well. So that's the first reason, is make sure that's one account to rule them all. Secondly, if you name the account well, and we do recommend you do, every time the apps appear inside your app catalog, when you open up Power Apps or you go to the Maker portal, it'll actually say Power App by that maker, not by George or Sarah or Bob. Because we don't trust George and Sarah or Bob to do production applications, even though they can build them. We're expecting that our application's gone through a life cycle, and that is why it's good to know that it's gone through a trusted process. We want to make sure they have a full license in place so they can do all the deployments. So typically an E3, and if you're doing any connectors, you want to make sure they have a premium license attached. You use typically for deployment to production. You could use the same account across your life cycle. And this is where the one to rule them all sort of kicks in. Depending on the decisions your governance team makes, you might potentially have another account, which is from dev into your staging environment, and then you go to production, depending on the life cycle you follow and how pedantic you are with your process. So there could be additional, but at a minimum, the one extra. We find it quite useful to have that account or another account have send as enabled. So when you create something like a Power Automate, you can actually, and any emails get sent where it's system generated. We don't want it to come from Troy or come from George or Sarah. It'll actually come from the Power Apps account. And you can then have a please don't reply to this email type of scenario. And that's why it looks incredibly professional. So you can actually send on behalf of. So highly recommend it to actually go down this route. And this is not difficult to do. This is logging a call and making sure it's available. And then it's going to be the default owner account in prod. Discussed this earlier. This is quite key because when you do roll out the management tools for Power Platform, you're going to be asked for this account. So this once again forms part of that process of making sure we have everything in place when we actually decide to roll out the management capabilities that are provided by tools like the COE. Cool, happy place. Let's have a look at our next one. And I'm moving through it at a steady pace, and I'm happy to answer questions. Please just unmute and shout out. Next thing on defaults. We mentioned earlier, when you switch it on, there is a default environment, typically called your company name, and everybody has access to create Power Apps or start creating solutions in the default environment based on their licensing. This obviously is not great. We can't switch off maker mode in the default environment. So one of the first things that we get recommended by Microsoft from a best practice, and we should be doing, is we should create a production apps environment. So the code called production apps, or whatever you want to call it, your company prod apps. but a space that we know that this is a maintained area that is locked down where only production-ready apps go in. So they've gone through whatever process we have for app verification and testing and deployment. So what's there we know is a prod app, and we will treat it as that from a supportability point of view as well. The also recommendation is that we rename the default environment. Microsoft recommend that we call it personal productivity, which I quite like. And the rationale behind renaming it is that people see it's a place that they can play. It's sort of using the name productivity sort of has a nice sort of connotation. It says, hey, you can go here and be productive. We'll talk about how we take those apps that are in production and actually move them forward, and how we can actually create a space where developers can actually have their own world. And that's the next point on the slide. So I'm not sure if anybody on this specific call is aware of it, but there's actually something called a Power Apps for Developer plan available from Microsoft. So how this works is very easy. You literally open up Google, type in Power Apps for Developer plan, and you'll land on a Microsoft Power Apps for Developer page. It's one of those normal sort of sign-up pages, and says, would you like to sign up for a Power Apps for Developer plan? You put in your email address of the company you work for, or the tenant that you have at work, or if you're working for a customer, and then Microsoft will then provision an environment in that tenant that is a developer plan only. So if you identify people in your organization that are Power Platform developers that are going to be doing development work on a regular basis, and you want to give them a space to do that dev work, you can't do it in prod. You want to create a trial environment for everybody. That's a very messy. You want to be able to isolate their work. If you create a Power Apps plan, it'll create a trial, it'll create an environment for them where they can go and build to the heart's content and play. They can enable features like trial, Power Virtual Agent or AI Builder credits. Typically, they renew quite nicely and they don't cost anything. Any app that they build, any solution they build inside of their developer environment, when they run it, it will have a big banner across the top that says dev environment, not for production apps. The cool thing, the recent update a couple of months back, originally when this came out, you could not share the apps you were building in dev with anybody else for testing. Now you can do that as well. So you can build an app, share it with a group of people and say, please test to make sure this is good, and then have that app go through the life cycle that you've agreed on in your governance team. So the governance team kicks in again. There's going to be a process for that. Last but not least, from an environment point of view, move all business critical apps to the production environment once you've got it set up, and once you've had your governance team decide on how you do that. So there's a news one. And make sure once you've done that, you limit the makers that are approved to actually build apps in production. So if you have any production apps currently that are sitting in that default environment that people are using on a regular basis, stage them out, actually wrap them into a solution. And once you've got your production apps environment set up, and you've got the security around that setup on who the makers are, etc., then you can move those production apps into that environment. So that becomes part of a practice. And this is, once again, it's an easy thing to do. We now moving apps are great. Your data connections that you have to things like SharePoint are there. You're not going to a new tenant. So it's not an incredibly difficult process, and it's a great way of testing your deployment process across environments. And you can use things like DevOps to actually automate that as well. Cool. So let's quickly do a quick recap. We want to make sure from a defaults point of view, not everybody has is the default account owner. We want to make sure we have a default account that we can use for production deployment. And we want to make sure that we create a production environment which is just for prod apps, critical supported apps. Some nuances around there. If you have a specific business unit that needs its own environment, maybe finance or HR, that's good as well, but you'll use the same rules that your governance team has agreed on around how access will be provided and the security principles. And we want to make sure that we move all business critical apps into that in production environment, locked down, and so they are supported and not available to everybody to use. Cool, happy place, fantastic. Moving on, next thing we want to do is we need a community, and I'll show you something really cool in a moment. So in order to make sure that everybody's on the same page, and the analogy I like to use here is when we talk about governance, it's effectively like governance we have inside of any country where people make rules. Maybe they're around taxation, maybe they're around road safety. So we have governance in place. People need to know what the rules are. So if you want to understand what the rules are when it comes to road traffic safety in Auckland, you can go to NZTA and you can find them there. And then you have people that enforce them. Those are the gentlemen and ladies in their red and blue cars with the flashy lights. So people need to know where they can go to understand what the rules are and where they can actually work effectively. And this is where the Power Platform Communication Site Template is an absolute blessing in disguise. This was launched, I think, probably a month and a half back. It's a pre-built Power Platform site template. It's installed into any tenant that you have via PowerShell, so PNP install, and it creates a dedicated space inside your SharePoint environment where you can send people when they want to know how to work with Power Platform in your organization, as well as where you can post any decisions or rules or guidelines from your governance team there. So there's a single place and reference, and also it becomes searchable via SharePoint search. And it's also a wonderful place to showcase successes that you've had inside your team. So I've actually got a version of that site running. So let's quickly have a look at that. We'll close that down and we'll put that up. So this is the site actually installed in one of my demo environments. And it's really cool. So it starts off with just sort of what you'd expect from a SharePoint site. So it's a communication site template. So it's really awesome. And Microsoft have populated a whole bunch of things. So if you go to get started, it gives you guidelines on how to start structuring your help and learning. Under help and learning, there is links to guided learning. And that's all links to the Microsoft catalog for beginners, intermediate, advanced. So those are all ready and available for you. And then platforms and controls. So when you do the setup through PNP, it'll ask you for your company name. So it'll be platform, Power Platform at your company. And you can start publishing the guidelines and rules that your governance team has decided on. So environments, for instance, we spoke about environments, the purpose of environments, personal productivity, power user, etc., and customer environments. So once again, a place where your members can go through your data loss prevention policies. This is why we want to bring your information security into play. So what policies are in place around DLP? So when I'm building a Power Platform solution, those policies, I know what those policies are. And then they've created a news and success area. This is obviously just a template example where you can go and publish news and success stories that you've got where you've had successes of Power Platform development. And this is part of the evangelism and adoption side. I think if you create a new news post, there are typically a few templates around there. So we'll say there's a champions template, there's a hackathon template, there's a story template, and a news template. You can actually, they even give you a few templates you can use as a base. And then events where you can do any internal learning. So really, really cool start off. So you don't have to do anything except install the template, and you effectively have a communication site with a lot of information, but 80% ready for your users just to consume on what the Power Platform is and what to use with it. And once again, dead easy, it's completely free. Type in Power Platform Communication Site Template into Google and you'll find the install file, the instructions. Takes all of 5 minutes if you have the correct permissions. Right, now let's get down to the stuff that ties us all together. So let's make it official. We want to look at the COE starter kit and manage environments. How do these play into what we're doing? So for those of you that are not aware of it, this is the description of the COE starter kit. I'll let you have a read through it. The COE starter kit is been around for quite a while and it's really matured. It's got a lot of capability. So fun fact, you could actually build the COE starter kit yourself. Everything that's in there is basically Power Platform components. It uses the Power Apps admin connector to do a whole bunch of stuff. It uses Power BI. Everything that's there is effectively available to build. They've done it for you. So originally when we got the COE starter kit, it was really around analytics and seeing what people were doing in our environment, but it's changed a lot and it plays very nicely into the steps we discussed earlier. So let's have a look at the purpose of it. Security. So from a secure point of view, The COE will assist you in establishing your controlled environment and also look at setting up DLP. So let's quickly dive into each of those very briefly. There are phenomenal sessions that have been recorded in the other tracks that talk about the COE in more detail. I highly recommend you go and watch them. They are 45 minutes just on COE. So from a controlled environment point of view, one of the things that the COE does is it allows us to control how things are built. So here's a great example. When I've got COE set up properly, and Sarah goes into the default personal productivity area and creates her first Power App. She's clicked on it, said, my first app, and the Canvas app opens up. She throws a few controls, saves it. Maybe she's done a bit more. We then send her an email. The COE will say, hey, Sarah's built an app. This is the first app Sarah's built. I will now email her, but I'll use that send as account that we spoke about earlier in the presentation and say, hi, Sarah, welcome. We've noticed you built your first app, really awesome. Here at Contoso, we have a way we work with Power Platform and we want to inform you. If you click this link, which will take you to the Power Platform SharePoint site that we discussed on the previous slides, Sarah, you'll find everything you need to know about how we work with Power Platform at Contoso, what our security principles are, what practices we have, how you can get involved in the community, success stories so you can be inspired to do other stuff as well. And you can also have, from a control point of view, have the Power Platform, the COE, actually go and add your admin account as a maker account into that app as well. So in case Sarah hasn't, if Sarah leaves for whatever reason, you have control as well. And this can be automated or manual. There's a lot of functionality. I'm not going to go through all those. We'll touch on some of those, some other sessions. Then from a monitoring point of view, and we'll have a look at a screenshot of that in a moment, we can gain insights into what people are doing. So how many apps are being built, how many flows are being built, how often the apps are being opened, what devices they've been opened on, when are the Power Automates running, what connectors are they using, when are they failing, who owns them. So all that data that is gathered in the back end is basically every time something happens, it's captured, it's put into Dataverse. There's a custom Dataverse table that's table set that's created as part of the COE install, and you can go and get an immediate view of how the Power Platform is actually being used inside your environment. And this is presented through Power BI reports, so nice rich visualizations and drill throughs. You can use the telemetry to then refine your processes and training. So if you notice, for instance, that there's a lot of people that are trialing a specific connector, or there's an app that's not being used, or somebody is there's flows that have been created that are failing because users don't know how to use a specific action or might not know about a new feature, you can actually feed that back. And our recommendation is that you then, your IT support guys who are monitoring this, feed that back into the governance team, which is why they're so important. So you can decide what type of training you want to publish on the Power Platform portal. So this sort of all ties together really well. From an app monetization point of view, it's a great way of actually showing users what people are doing. And you can start seeing when people are connecting to legacy systems, and use this as a good gateway to go back to the business and say, right, we can actually modernize. We have a success metric. We can see people are using it. It is successful. And you can also start looking at where people are connecting to third-party systems using Power Platform. So why do we even worry about that, or why we care about that? If our staff are building, our solution builders, our citizen developers are building solutions against third-party solutions, and they're not into production, we can use this once again as a piece of telemetry to go back and see how we can assist them. And maybe it's time to actually take that connector and say, go to business and say, there's people are using the connector for legacy system. Is it not time to actually do a modernization and bring it into Power Platform as a first party application? So really, really insightful data you get. And then this is something that was added quite recently, but one of my favorite parts, nurturing, develop training and templates, SharePoint best practices, and create. I've got create there, so my typing is terrible, and foster community. So one of the things that we now get with the COE is, because we now, as I mentioned earlier, and we know when people are creating the first app, what they're using, we can start targeting users and say, oh, you know, Sarah, I noticed you have created 3 or 4 apps that are actually being used. but they're still setting personal productivity, let me onboard you into our program. And this is where the committee once again kicks in and the SharePoint site. Let me onboard you. Let's walk you through, or maybe send you an article on how to create your personal your developer account, so you have a space to build. Let's introduce you to the lifecycle management, and there's some really amazing stuff coming out from Microsoft on lifecycle management that they mentioned last week. And it'll actually get your community working. So your apps can now be moved into their production environment. So a really awesome way to actually connect, but you have all the telemetry and data around that. This is a quick snapshot of what a typical dashboard looks like. And you can see from the screen there, it's got things like introduction. There's overview of Power Apps, so it has a bit of an onboarding as well. And then it has access to all the different telemetry you would need, what apps have been created, which were the makers. Now in this example here, they clicked on the makers tab in the COE. I can see all the makers. Top line, Megan, I see what her job is. I can see how many apps she's working with, how many flows, how many UI flows, how many bots, where she works, and I can get data on which business units or business areas are actually my highest users. And if you have an international footprint, awesome, you can get a nice long map as well. And those are all, you can drill down onto those. So you have all this telemetry data. So I would definitely, for you, I'd be targeting Megan Bowen and making sure that she has a dev environment, that she understands the life cycle, and introduce her to the standards that we are building with. Look at what she's building. Can we potentially create components out of that that are reusable? So once you have the telemetry data and you feed that back into your governance team, so your super users and your administrators, you can start making effective decisions around Power Platform for your organization. I hope that sort of gives you an idea of why starting with the governance team and getting all those little in-between bits are important. Because once you have that in place, the COE lights up. Without that in place, the COE is just basically a tool. And if nobody's looking at it or doing stuff off it, it's sort of irrelevant. It's just a place you'll go to find stuff. When you set up the COE, one of the things it'll ask you, there's a couple of environmental variables you'll set up. One of them is, what is your admin account? So we've done that. It'll ask you where your SharePoint site is, where you do your learning and training. So all these questions, all these things lead into a nice COE install. For those of you who are not familiar with the COE, last thing before we move on to the final slide, I think, is the COE is free download. If you just literally go to type in a Power Platform COE, there's a phenomenally documented site on what the COE is, so you can read up on it, download the COE install files. The process to install it takes 2 hours typically. Depending on what license you have and what permissions you have, typically you need to have elevated privileges. This is very much an IT install. It does run under a Power Platform per user license, so you will need an elevated license. And typically this is why we mentioned when you're creating that admin license that you want to make sure it has a full license allocated to it, so you can do the install under that context. If you are using the reporting part of it, so there are some basic reports. If you're using the Power BI side, you'll need a Power BI license as well for that account that's going to be doing the interrogation and viewing. And if you do share the COE with other users, they would need to be licensed as well. So yes, it's free in the sense that you don't have to pay for it, but there is a license overhead, but it's typically a lot of companies just have a single Power or COE user account, the license at once, and then whoever needs to get the data pulls that off. So the COE is out, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard of managed environments. Managed environments is something that was announced quite a while back. It had a few different names. A managed environment is Microsoft moving towards the ability to actually provide some of the COE functionality, but as a product set within inside of Power Platform. So quick run through. Managed environments is a suite of capabilities that allow admins to manage Power Platform at scale. So if it sounds like the COE, it's because there are a lot of some COE elements built into it. Admins can use managed environments with any type of environment except developer environments. So managed environments need to be enabled on your environment, and I'll show you that in a moment because it's really quick to do. And the primary elements that you're going to be managing right now is limit sharing. You get usage insights and data policies. So this, as of today, this was as of probably last week, actually. What's available for managed environments now is you get a admin digest. You're getting the email once a week telling you what's happening in your environment, and that's sent to the administrators. You get a view of the data loss prevention policies, and we'll look at that in a moment. You can do some limit sharing, so you can just share. You can in the environment you can define how that environment can be shared out, what the limitations are, and they say easy activation. I'll show you that. A space just a click. Coming down the line for managed environments, and this is really cool. You'll have usage insights. So you might, if you're like super awake, I know it's late on Friday afternoon. There will be user insights in the COE. So yep, that's moving there. License reports, that's going to be really key. So what licenses will be used for different apps. There'll be a solution checker that'll basically do a check like you have in the solution checker now when you build this, when you create a solution inside a Power Platform. And the whole idea of the solution check is that it's part of your deployment process. There'll be maker onboarding. And once again, this sounds familiar. It's in the COE at the moment, so it's going to be into managed environments as well. So there might be some transition, but the messaging we're getting is that both will live in their own spaces. And there's going to be some pipeline management. Now, this was actually demonstrated last week at the last Power Platform community call. So you'll be able to create deployment pipelines. So from an IT point of view, from a support point of view, once again, this is going to be something that's influenced by your governance team. Create deployment pipelines, and any applications that either are using that making environment, you'll be able to say, deploy this using this pipeline and take it through these steps. So a lot of cool things coming down the line when it comes to managed environments. Let's have a look at what managed environments look like now. And I've got a demo environment up and running. And if the demo gods are with us, it'll run quickly. So this environment, I have just the generic environment that comes with the trial tenants, and I'll click on it. As soon as you click on it, top corner, you get enable managed environments. So let's do that and see what it tells us. This is the first place I want to have a look at. So increase visibility and control of Contoso. Once enabled, all users will need Power Apps or Power Automate licenses to continue using apps and flows in this environment. So the managed environments will require you to have the appropriate licensing, and that typically is going to be a per apps user or a per user license, or access to pay-as-you-go licensing, because any environment that's inside there needs to have that license type. So if you've got an app and it's inside of an environment, and you don't, and it's not using any of the premium connectors, and you decide to make that environment a managed environment, it's going to ask you for a per user app or a per user license. So there is a license requirement or license indications when you come to managed environments. My understanding on the reasoning behind this is because it's managed environments typically are managed for a specific purpose. So you've created an environment, say, for production finance apps, and you want to make sure that is most of those you want to make sure that it is run properly. So there's an overhead. The next thing you can do there is limit sharing. So help reduce risk by limiting how widely Canvas apps are shared. You can go and say exclude security groups and limit individuals. So you can say this, any apps created in this environment can only be shared with these security groups, which is really cool as well. And we can do that in the back end, but this gives you a nice UI to do that. Get adoption insights like top flows, etc. So what happens here is the metrics that are already been pulled out in like the COE. COE is implicit. We have to have created it. This will do it automatically without us having to install anything, and then send us a digest to the admin group telling us what's happened. And then last but not least is we have data policies, where if you click and see the data policies in the environment. So right now it doesn't have a huge amount of capabilities, but as you saw in the previous slide, there's a lot of capability coming in and coming down the line. And I believe not only is my time up, but that's a thank you from me as well. So I hope that was useful. The idea is if you are using the Power Platform either as a system integrator, we're working with customers, or as a company that's adopted the Power Platform, there are some very practical steps you can do to actually get control of your environment. And they can be very easy to do. And if you follow the process that I've mentioned in these slides, once you've got those in place, then enabling something like the COE is actually useful, because it's actually going to be used for a specific purpose and not just because it's cool to have the COE. I'm going to stop presenting. I think there are any questions.
Hey, Troy, yep, there's a few questions out there. So one about the installation of the COE starter kit. So is it still via a series of solutions?
Yes.
Or there's a wizard type of?
I haven't done an install, admittedly, for probably about 2 months. And the last time I did it, it was still very much running through PowerShells. If there's been a change, I'm not aware of it, so I would stand corrected. But I'm more than happy to go and figure that out if anybody would like, and get back. But last time I did it, it was run through. It's got a lot better. I think the first time I ran through it it took me a good couple of hours. Because you've got to have the right permissions and stuff and the licensing in place. But after that, last one was quite quick.
Yeah, and exactly. I think from what I seen as well, it's still a series of solutions. It does take some time.
It does.
I think, but yeah, so plan it.
Yeah. The key thing.
Quick.
Yeah, the key thing with installing the COE is make sure you have elevated privileges, because you're going to need to either be probably sitting with somebody that has GA or very elevated rights, because there's a lot of every time there's a requirement to do approval on an app connector or an Azure connector, you need to you're getting that pop up. So most of the times I do it, I normally sit with the IT admin and to get them to do it, and I just guide them through it. And there's a couple of there's about 6 environmental variables you need to know about before you start as well. So if you've got those, and it's well documented, if you've got those ready, like the account and the SharePoint site, then you just basically click those in, and you're good to go.
And there's a question from Justin. So what is the recommended way to limit user access, ability to create?
Right. As I understand it, the last time I did the run through, in the default environment, you can't limit users. The only way you can limit users in the default environment is to remove the licensing from the user. So going to their AD or going to the Office 365 backend and say remove Power Platform license from the person. So the default environment does not have an option to remove a user from the maker profile. That's just the bottom line. That's one of the reasons why the recommendation is to create a specific environment for Power Platform for production apps. It's just the way it is. With the DLP basically prevents you from connecting to different, using different connectors. So the idea there of the DLP is to limit you, if you're creating a solution inside of the default environment and let's say you're connecting to F&O for whatever reason. I can't think why you want to do that in default. If you're doing that, then you should be on the premium side anyway. That I can't go and take the financial results and then tweet it out using the Twitter connector. So that's where the DLP kicks in, is really to prevent you from sending data and using connectors where they shouldn't be used in place. So that's there's no reason. That's why creating the production environment is key.
Nice.
Cool. Any other
session? Very important governance. I think it's some things as well we often overlook, especially as more people and business users on the platform. And it's kind of easy to make apps, right, and everything.
Yeah.
Hence, the more important for governments, so that I guess as an organization, or as not to sort of lose control of that thing, because then it's way more complicated to have a COE or governance after the fact than to demonstrate first.
So the idea of the COEs is not new. I'm come from the SharePoint world back in the days, and it was something that in the SharePoint world as well. It was very easy to implement, and let's face it, the Power Platform was incredibly powerful, but really easy to just start your first app. And when we don't think about it, especially if you've just signed up for a tenant or you've introduced M365 into your organization, it's just there. and we'll speak openly about it in Fusion 5. We at one stage got a point where we were like, no, but everybody's just doing test apps. No, you can't, and it's not necessary, and it's not the professionals in the CRM or the Power Platform team that are doing it. It's the receptionist who's thinking like, well, this Power Apps thing is really cool. And you get that proliferation of my first app or test app. It just sits there. So one of the other things the COE does, which is really awesome, is that it can do cleanup as well. So it can do recommendations. You can use it to say, hey, I noticed that you haven't used this app for 3 months, Troy. What do you want to do? So it's really, really a powerful tool. Should be like a mandatory. Yeah, Chris. So issues. Yeah, so they should. So the environments. I mean, the whole idea behind environments is to create segregated areas. So if I look at some of our government customers that we work with, or some of our financial services customers, they typically create environments around functional units where they want to have that security wall in place. So a great thing we'll have environments, say for finance apps, where the apps are specifically for the finance team, is you create the environment, only give the finance team access. They don't need to do anything. They open up, they make the app on Power Apps on their phone, and they see their finance apps. Nobody else sees it. So it's a great way of creating that security layer. We would do the exact same thing if we created a Teams site in Teams and only limit access, and then nobody else can see it. Same concept there. So it's a great way of separating that. And a good thing there with that as well is you can then create DLP policies specifically for that environment. So yes, you can be a maker in the finance team, but you can't connect to a connector that could potentially have you push data out into application, or even maybe send an email. Or I like to use the Twitter one because Twitter is quite relevant nowadays. Thank you, Elon. And accidentally share data out. So it's great for having a controlled environment.
Great. Thanks again.
Great, kia ora, guys. Thank you very much. I hope you have a good rest of the afternoon, and good day, mate, from Melbourne. Cheers.